in that context. Isaiah 62. But let's get down to verse 10. Go through the gates. So the context for gates are that they mean what?
Praise.
They mean praise. So in Isaiah 62, when he says go through the gates, what is he saying?
Praise.
He's saying, listen, your praise is entering through a gate. Now, but look what he says. He says, go through the gates, prepare the way for the people. All right? Let's go back to the other example, Psalms 102. God was moved to make you worshipers. Why? He heard the groanings of the people. Now what does he say here? Go through the gates. Why? Because in doing so, you are preparing the way for people.
Wow.
All right, now that's never the motivation. If the fruit becomes the motivation, we become twisted. Because then we worship for an end result. We don't worship for who he is. And once we stop worshiping him for who he is, we've stopped worshiping altogether. And we've reduced it to form. Verse 10, go through the gates. Why? Because in doing so, you're preparing the way for people. Well, what does it look like? Build up the highway. Take out the stones. Lift up a banner over the people. Do you know what he's just described here? Now, we watched this in Weaverville. In Weaverville, it was it's a church, a city that at one time was known very, very heavily for witchcraft, occultism. In fact, one of the pastors that was here visiting here today, or in our pastor's meeting, I left early to come to this. He was familiar with Weaverville, and he used to live in that area. It was known for just the witches, the warlocks, and all this stuff. And it doesn't mean it's all cleared up now. Like everything's fine. But there's been such a transformation. I'll tell you how it happened. When I got there, all I did is I focused on raising up the church that knew what worship was, just to learn to respond to the presence. And it was interesting because we had one piano player, and she ended up moving out of the area, so we had nobody to play any instruments. So I would lead a cappella. Then we had Kathy Valentin. It's an interesting story. I don't know if she's told you, but Kathy Valentin, who came to me, she said, I played the piano as a child. I said, really? She said, yeah. She says, you just tell me one song you want me to learn for next Sunday, and I'll learn it. So she would be ready for the one song. She just wouldn't practice it all week till she could just get down the basic chords, And I said, all right, well, we're going to sing this song. So we'd sing 3 or 4 or 5 songs, but one song we had a piano player. So we'd sing a cappella till the one song, and she played the piano, and she was still, we'd sing, without any instruments after that. And then the next week, we just make sure she'd learn another song, and so we would do those same 2 songs now the next week, and a few others like that. We just did that until she knew a whole bunch of songs. So it was just, it's just kind of hardcore. But what we would do is we would spend extended periods of time just in the presence of worshiping. We'd have prayer meetings where, a couple-hour prayer meeting. The first hour and a half was just worshiping the Lord, and we would just take extended periods of time on into the night just worshiping. What happened is the atmosphere of an entire city began to change. Why? Because in this verse he says, let's just say this is a gate. He says you go through the gate. How? You go through the gates with praise. So I'm not just focused on what you do for me, God. I'm focused on who you are. Remember? Thanksgiving is our response to the acts of God. Praise is our response to his ways, his nature, who he is. So God, I just celebrate your goodness. You're so kind and so patient. Excuse me, I'm just learning how to walk. And so as I'm giving you praise, I find that I've just gone through a gate and I've come deeper into the realm of God's presence.
Wow.
But what I don't want to do is I don't want to measure what's happening. I want to keep my eyes on him.
Right.
And I just want to celebrate him. And so there are times when that presence becomes deeper and more profound. Now what's happening is I'm filled with absolute peace, absolute rest. But according to Isaiah 42, the Lord is stirred up as a man of war, and he sees what I'm doing in absolute peace before him. He goes out, thrashes on the devil, and I think in the result he comes back and calls me a mighty man of valor. And all I did was stand in peace and honor his name. See? So I walked into this place of peace, and what happens, the angelic realm is released through our physical obedience. There's no other way to explain. Moses holding his hands in the air, gets tired, he puts them down. His associates come, lift his hands up and support him. And as long as his hands up, Israel would win a war. As soon as his hands are down, they're not. Why? Because the angelic realm is attached to, released by the physical obedience of God's people. You don't ever want to be just a worshiper in your heart. You want to incorporate your body. Why? Don't try to figure it out. That's why it says, lift up holy hands without wrath or doubting. Without wrath, don't get mad about it. Without doubting, don't question how good it does. Just do what he said to do. And so here we are. I'm blessing the Lord. And what I don't realize is that my obedience is actually releasing angelic hosts into the community to do what? He said, prepare the way for people. How is that done? By removing the stones and the dusty rubble. What does it mean? It means that you as a worshiper, you're a spiritual bulldozer.
Yep.
This is fascinating language that is created here for us to get a picture. He says, all right, as you come into my presence, you're preparing the way for people. You're removing the stones. What are you doing? He says you're building up a highway. Highways are not just, they don't just pour asphalt or cement over land. They level out an area. They remove the boulders. They remove the stones. They level it up, and then they lay down the pavement. All right? This is what it's the actual description the Lord uses to describe the result of a worshiper. And he designed you as such because he heard the groaning of the listeners. So here we are, so worshiping the Lord, and the heavenly host is released to establish the very nature of the world that this king oversees. And as we worship and we continue just to respond to that presence, we're literally preparing the way for people. And we do it by just celebrating him, responding to him. The angels know what to do. They respond. They enforce the reality of our expression until our cities start becoming like heaven itself. Where the obstacles are removed. And you'll find this in city after city, where there have been worshipers in our city in Weaverville that got to the place where unbelievers would actually witness to visitors who came to town, and they would tell them what God was doing in the city. An absolute fact. It took 5 years probably to get the kind of breakthrough where there was a shift. It took 5 years to get the real shift. And then people would come to me and say, I know what you're talking about now. I know what you've been working at. And there was all this opposition and difficulty. And after about 5 years, I'm not saying it should take that long for anyone else. This was in a place that was very raw, no record of the move of God, nothing. Just, it was a breakthrough after 5 years of persistence in declaring the message and practicing it. We'd get people together and we just worship for time on end. We just stand before the Lord and worship, and we would make that a primary focus, that we wanted to learn what it was to minister to God. And in doing so, atmosphere, if you can just picture, the atmosphere begins to change. We finally moved to the downtown theater. And they would show Poltergeist on Saturday night, and we'd show up Sunday morning. People used to ask us, the evil movie that they show on Saturday or during the week, does it affect your service? They go, no, our services affect the movies. And it's true. We actually had people who tell us that, well, we went to a movie Sunday night after your service there, and there was this presence in the place, and it's like light is just stronger than darkness. So you just go wherever you need to go, and you worship the Lord, and just realize that you're preparing the way for people by removing stones, the offense and the obstacles in thought and in process for people to seek the Lord.